it sounded super, super nice. That's nice, because then we don't have to rush through the questions. You ready? Good? We can start. Perfect. Can we talk? Perfect. Okay. My mic is on. Good. Hi, everyone. My name is Yasmin Al-Douri. I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion today, and really happy to see all of you here on a Saturday afternoon, on a sunny Saturday afternoon, actually. Before we start unraveling into the discussion, I am really looking forward to have this panel discussion with my fellow panelists, but also we want to make sure that your questions are heard, and that the discussion is also not only one where we lecture you, but also where you're involved. So in case you have questions, we will have a question round later, after the panel discussion. But you're also able to submit your questions on the Slido. So in case you want to do that, we have a specific link, which is slide.do, and then the hashtag YSC 2024. Again, slide.do, hashtag YSC 2024. And with that being said, I think it's time to start this really nice panel on unveiling feminist perspectives on cybersecurity, and specifically on the question, how can we challenge militarization and gendered norms in cyberspace? So what exactly are we going to talk about today? So we live in a world that is witnessing more and more conflict. We've seen several wars happening in the past couple of years all around the world, conflicts becoming militarized, becoming more violent, and we see that emerging technologies that have arrived in our everyday life are also arriving in the military sector now. So therefore, conflicts and wars are changing. And they're not only changing in the space of national or domestic land, but also in the cyberspace. So we see cyberspace also being militarized, and conflicts within that space as well. So questions of how do we deal with these issues have caused many new theories to emerge, such as feminist approaches towards cybersecurity. But then the question comes, what exactly is feminist cybersecurity, or what are feminist approaches to cybersecurity? We'll try to answer this question today in this panel, and we will discuss specifically the intersection of feminist perspectives on digital and cybersecurity in spaces, with focuses on UN policies and EU policies. So with that being said, I would like to welcome our panelists to the stage. I would like to introduce Juraj Majcin, who is a policy analyst in the EU for the World Program. He works mainly in the European and Transatlantic Security and Defense Cooperation, as well as hybrid threats when it comes to disinformation and cybersecurity. Prior to joining that task force, Juraj led the peace and security defense at Friends for Europe. He also worked on multiple policy research projects on digital governance and security at the World Economic Forum and the Geneva Center. Welcome, Juraj. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Our second panelist, Pavlova, is a Share the Mic in Cyber Fellow at New America. I already told her we will talk about this fellowship after this panel, where she explores gendered impacts of data weaponization, analyzing how malicious data breaches can harm individuals through multiple extortions and the ramification of cyber attacks, specifically when it comes to social resilience and international security. She has a driven civil society engagement at the UN processes when it comes to cybersecurity and cybercrime, was also at the USCE, specifically focusing on human dimension of security. And she has, which I really like, by the way, her research very much focuses on the impact of technology on people and translates into the evidence into recommendations of improved governance. So thank you for being here, Pavlina.
Thank you for having me.
We were supposed to have Sofiia here today as well, but Sofiia couldn't make it. She has some problems with her family, I guess, and she couldn't make it. So unfortunately, we won't hear her perspective on this topic. But I'm really looking forward to have a longer discussion with the two of you because of that. Maybe quick information on why I'm actually hosting this panel. My name is Yasmin Al-Douri. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Responsible Technology Hub. We focus on bringing youth voices to the responsible tech space, focusing on AI, social media, and other emerging technologies that are impacting our society and our everyday life. With that being said, we also talk a lot about feminist approaches in the cyberspace. And what we often have is a discussion on what exactly is a feminist approach to cybersecurity. If you do your research, you will see different approaches, different outlooks from different organizations. But specifically here for this panel, I would just like to know from your perspective, from your respective fields, what is feminist cybersecurity and what technical approaches does it entail? Maybe we'll start with Pavlina and then we'll go on with Juraj.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you very much for having me, though it's Saturday, but how to spend it better than in such a lovely company. So thank you very much for hosting me. Indeed, feminist approaches can mean many things. How I approach those approaches is that they put people first. They are very human-centric. And especially, and this is my key reason why I came here today to discuss it, because actually, as I started in the field of cybersecurity, my first research paper was on challenging the notion of state-centric national security perspective to cybersecurity, and looking from my perspective as someone working with human rights defenders at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and training them on digital security practices, to see how these perspectives are often forgotten. We see marginalized groups, we see over-targeted groups, we see how, and we'll discuss these attacks in detail, especially now that we are only two speakers today, how many intersections there can be, how many points of vulnerability there can be. And these approaches are so often just overlooked because of state-centric policies. Something that very much inspired me was also the OSCE concept of comprehensive security. So it's security on three pillars. One is the military and political perspective, so something that we understand under state-centric views and national security views. But then you have the human rights perspective. So how human rights are being respected, whether offline or online. And there is this direct link to overall security of the societies, of societal resilience, based on how much these human rights are protected and how much the individuals are accounted for in the policy responses. And the third is the economic and environmental dimension. So as OSCE works, and it very much inspired my way to cybersecurity, and now also the approaches I argue for is that you need to, it's not like we are saying that one perspective is better than other. That's what we are saying is that we need more equality of these perspectives, more holistic approaches. So for what feminism in cyber security and also in combating cybercrimes, on which I work currently, means is that it's the support of human rights, is the is the redefining of concept of what is really critical in cyberspace, bringing gender equality, which is still not there, to these policies, and gender-sensitive and gender-responsive approaches to these problems.
Thank you, Juraj.
Thank you. And before I begin, I would just like to thank the Young Security Conference for organizing this timely debate. It's good to debate it with a fellow Slovak, actually. So I think there are many panels where you would have two Slovaks debating cybersecurity. So thank you for instead of strolling through the nice streets of Munich, that you decided to spend the few moments with us. So I think that this topic is important from two main aspects. I mean, of course, cybersecurity, and don't have to explain, you all, since you came to security conference, I understand you know it's a major issue. And only last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a major statement, very rare statements, both by the EU and NATO, condemning Russia's attacks against targets and critical infrastructure targets within the European Union. We also see, and I also don't have to hugely explain that Russia deploys everything they have in their cyber offensive arsenal against the European Union. They also try to influence our elections. So we see huge influence and really substantial campaign by Russia and also China against institutions of the free world. If you, let's say, but what feminist approaches? What does it mean? How can this help us? Even in a traditional security setting, you would have which is many times it's mostly male. They focus on very hardcore, let's say, subjects. So critical infrastructure. How do we protect a water dam? How do we protect this and that system? But this is not really I don't say it's not important, it's very important. Of course, we all want to live in a safe environment. We all want to have safe drinking water. But I'll also fight against disinformation and have safe devices that we use. But what feminist approach, and already Pavlina touched upon that, it brings this human element there. Because we don't, and then in theory, you don't want to bother that much with theory, but you have state-centric approaches that really focus on critical infrastructure. That's the mantra, and then you have a lot of hospitals, you have judicial system, you have law enforcement, so you protect that. But you don't really see people. And in many, it's been, we already had in 2012, the Human Rights Council recognized that same rights that people have offline are also applicable online. But when you see how we actually look at cybersecurity, the prevailing aspect is really, people would say gender neutral, but I would say human blind. We don't look at victims. We don't try to conceive the technology in a way that we would already assess what harm it may cause to different individuals. So this is a human security aspect, and what feminism and feminist approaches brings here is just pure fact that different groups, different individuals have different vulnerabilities. I think if as a man, if I go in the night to a park, of course I assess the situation differently, right? Maybe a woman, would see more, would that see as a more potentially dangerous situation. So she would spot, she would look at different aspects. She might feel threatened, by different, by someone just walking in the park, which for someone who might not necessarily be a threat. And the same applies also in the online environment. So what feminist approaches bring is this attitude, is this approach that we really have to differentiate, and really have to keep in mind that everyone has different vulnerabilities. Of course, it's also for men, it's for women, but also queer individuals. So I think feminist approaches bring this diversity and realization that people and different groups have different vulnerabilities.
I think Pavlina wants to add on that directly.
Yes, well, when I hear vulnerabilities, here I go. And it's part of my research, and so I just wanted to chime in that something, just like what I've been in a process, and I will also speak about my fellowship research and other experiences. But what have been a very much underlying narrative I've been hearing from different experts with whom I'm conducting the interviews is that one thing is cyber. And we'll speak about like spyware and ransomware and data leaks and what are the impacts because of your gender. But the other thing is like the key here is that the offline context is just such a key to it, and we cannot simply put them apart. Like online world is the extension of the offline world. And why the vulnerability for women exists, or for example, very similar vulnerabilities that women experience are experienced by for example, gender and sexual minorities. Because there are like two key dimensions to it. One is that they are over-targeted. There is still not, for example, when it comes to cybercrime, men have been found more likely to commit cybercrime, especially those that are kind of the extension of family or partner abuse, such as stalkware, spyware, online harassment, etc. And then women still have many other vulnerabilities, such as like income, access to education, but importantly also the digital divide, right? Gender digital divide, access to internet, and how they're enabled to use the online spaces. And then also how they are being attacked is very important because oftentimes, especially in this kind of like content-based cyber attacks, women are impacted very differently, and it's like this analogy, like going to the park, just, context is everything. So I recall that how, for example, when you, what I've been seeing studying these attacks is that women will be way more, so men can be attacked in these online spaces because of their work or because what they said. Women can be attacked for anything. They can be attacked for how they look, what is their weight, what they are wearing, and more broadly, and it happens especially to politicians and human rights activists, etc. The whole families will be attacked. There have been cases that spyware was put into like journalists, for example, young child phone, because that would be how to gain access to her and her information. So like they will be preeminently attacked and attacked in different ways. And then even, and I'm concluding, I promise, and then even when you have like non-targeted attacks, such as attacks on critical infrastructure or data exploiting cyber attacks, when we see, for example, healthcare data, you have huge pile of everyone's data, and yet women and minorities and etc. will have further repercussions, will be experiencing more insecurity and more harms because of the context of their vulnerability, because of different kind of laws. For example, with healthcare data, there is the problem of pregnancy and interrupting pregnancy and what it can mean for women in different contexts and law. Or when you have communities where gender-based violence is very high as a risk, what does it mean when a pile of addresses gets leaked to the online space? What does it mean for these women? So they can be experiencing way more insecurity and psychological and maybe even physical harm because of that. And the last point is, which is very interesting to me, on critical infrastructure. So even if you have disruption to healthcare, or if you have disruption to public transportation because of DDoS attacks or because of other kind of even like disruptive or destructive attacks, women, for example, in many societies rely more on public transport because of the context, because of the like underlying differences. Who is the primary, who is the like primary person to use car in a family because of their incomes, etc. And then with healthcare, giving birth, etc., delivering kids safely. If there are disruptions to healthcare systems and to the operational capacity, it's again women who are overexposed to these harms. So there is just so much of offline, which we bring online. And it wouldn't be a complete conversation if we didn't understand that it's just like this extension of what we are experiences offline.
Yeah, I completely understand. I think one point we will talk about minorities and the impact of technology on minorities specifically in a second. But I want to push a little bit on that. In means of, because we're saying, okay, we need a holistic approach towards cybersecurity. We understood that cybersecurity is very, very tightly intertwined with our everyday world, meaning that what we experience, for example, the discrimination we experience in the real world, we might experience in the cyberspace as well. My question is, with all these ideas and with all these points that you two raised, how can a feminist perspective actually address the militarization of the cyberspace specifically? So it means, like, if we specifically, again, when we talk about intertwinedness and we talk about how cybersecurity is basically just a mirror of the real world, we know that we obviously also have some kind of militarization of the cyberspace. If we look at the wars in the Ukraine, if we look at the current war in the Middle East, we see that the cyberspace is used in different terms, meaning it could be from disinformation to malware to spyware. So there are different ways to actually hold this kind of cyber conflict or cyber war. So I think for me, and maybe all for you also, it's kind of interesting to understand how could a feminist perspective specifically address that, or even like go one step further and say, okay, this would be a solution to the problem. Maybe Juraj, you want to start?
So it's an interesting point about militarization of cyberspace and feminism, because what we mean by militarization of cyberspace, it has to do more with the current state of international system. When in the 1990s we thought it would be a peaceful open world, so peaceful open cyberspace for everyone. Of course, with international tensions growing and with war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression against Ukraine, and more assertive China, and also other powers. And of course, it would be not natural not to see these tensions at the kinetic world, if I can say, not being translated into cyberspace. So of course, what before, in the I would maybe Pavlina would be more apt to talk about different UN processes on cyber regulation, but before there was a lot of focus on peaceful use of cyberspace. Cyberspace was compared even to outer space. This is a common space for mankind. But with actors abusing and using, deploying their cyber capabilities to pursue their foreign policy objectives or even their war objectives, like you see in Ukraine, because in Ukraine, a lot of attacks by Russia are, if for instance, just to give you an example, 24th of February, before actually Russian bombs reached the targets in Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, there were multiple cyber attacks launched on Ukraine. So we clearly have militarization of cyberspace. And also on the Western side, we also see this, right? So we had just, it was a few years ago, EU cyber diplomacy toolbox was adopted that clearly allows EU member states collectively to take coercive actions against perpetrators of cyber attacks. So yeah, there is, of course, so there is demilitarization. Here I would argue. But what feminism and what feminist approaches can help us with is, of course, to look at to protect victims on let's say, how to say it, so it is not perceived as warmongering, but on our side, let's say, what can we do to protect not only infrastructure, but individuals, humans, but also on when we, I don't say we should, but should we conduct a cyber offensive operation, we should do it applying international humanitarian law, which many countries still would dispute that it's not applied. So in cyberspace. So it's also this realization that if we conduct an operation, maybe we shouldn't hit that hospital with that cyber attack because it's a medical facility and it's protected by international law. So this is also something that feminist perspectives bring on board. This attention to this humanitarian aspect, I would say.
I think, or maybe Pavlina, you want to add on that before I
Yes,
ask you the next
well,
question, actually.
I will just pile up on this. Exactly, it's about upholding law and norms and something very, just some framework to the UN norms which were mentioned, and which I will discuss further today, is that by norms, what I usually specifically mean, because norms can be for different organizations and different societies can mean many things, but there is actually a framework of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, which has been agreed upon by all member states of the UN, and this is the conduct of how states should behave in cyberspace. So, for example, not attacking critical infrastructure, protecting critical infrastructure instead. How they should cooperate on information sharing, on vulnerability disclosure, and other things. And actually arguing for upholding law and norms in a way that is benefiting all and not only certain groups or certain states would be a very feminist perspective to cybersecurity. But also in international cybersecurity, what is important and where feminist perspectives can be very beneficial is the arms race which we are witnessing. And this is not only with, we have offensive cyber capabilities. What does it mean? Are we going to, is this just another arms race we are doing? Right now there is a handful of countries which have very powerful capabilities, but others want to come into the space. So this kind of potential for attacks and sophisticated attacks by state actors who are not only targeting other states, they are targeting their own citizens oftentimes. They are targeting individuals. And especially also like the considerations for spyware and the use of spyware, and what is legal in the use of spyware by national law enforcement authorities. What should be the procedure with the use of spyware, and how much should we actually have it deployed? But also interesting considerations about, like, the feminist perspective is about challenging aggressive and harmful cyber action by any actor. And we also have to look at what is happening with hacktivist groups, because what have we seen as part of, so there have been like two big leaps in cyberspace. One was with Corona, so cybercrime has been increasing, but also the kind of politicization because of the geopolitical context, which is worsening. So we have cyber criminal groups and hacktivist groups, often supported with countries, whether funded or affiliated with the countries or protected by the countries, who are attacking many targets from critical infrastructure to individuals in cyberspace. So feminist perspectives come in there, saying that, like, challenging the state-centered view, for example, as I mentioned, importantly on spyware, or what is legally what is protected under international law as part of critical infrastructure, because this is not defined on UN level. What is critical infrastructure that you cannot target? And for example, something that I've been arguing for at the UN for international cybersecurity is the protection of humanitarian organizations as part of critical infrastructure. Because for now, there is not a single agreement on what is critical infrastructure that can be at the UN level, which cannot be targeted, for example. So just looking at these impacts and then deciding on how to ensure the protection would be a feminist perspective on cybersecurity that could help the state of security we have right now.
Juraj, you already had looked at me and already gave me the tip that you wanted to say something, so I'm going to give you the space to say it.
Yeah, so of course Pavlina wears her UN hat, so and I don't so, but she mentions politicization, but I understand I understand that as a UN official you have to be impartial. So let me say a few words about that, and what we say, and I think it should be said that many times we make this false distinction between cybersecurity and online smear campaigns against women, for instance, or online stalking. But I think, and that people would say, no, this is not cybersecurity. Cybersecurity only when someone hacks a critical infrastructure, and I think it's not right. You know, if you have attack against a organized smear campaign against a woman, against a journalist, a human rights defender, it's a cybersecurity issue, and our societies should have mechanisms to deal with that. And just to give you a very, I would say, telling example from my own country, from Slovakia. So we have a very famous and I would say very well-known Slovak female journalist, Zuzana Kovačić-Hanzelová, who was attacked was victim many times by, it started years ago when she started receiving sexual images from unsolicited sexual visual content from different individuals, and then she was victim of different smear campaigns and disinformation campaigns that had these gender elements, portraying women as someone that's not really intelligent and they shouldn't talk about politics, until it got to a point that she was actually attacked on the street. And it started with a gender-based online violence. So we should not just take this as something that happens online. No, this has real victims, and it harms our processes. And in such a critical time as before the European election, we should all keep this in mind and make sure that the politicians and also business leaders, because most of these companies are of course private, do whatever they can to stop this and to prevent that and protect their users.
I think Pavlina gets one more point to that, and then we'll move on to state-centricness.
Yes, I just wanted to add that indeed the discussion on what is international cybersecurity consideration, what is cybercrime consideration, is increasingly blurry. And this is because the threshold for conducting cyber attack with a level impacting international security is lowering. What I mean by it is that many cyber criminal groups now can attack points with simple DDoS attacks, can make critical infrastructure, like disrupt the operational capacity and making it a national security concern. But also we see the other way around, when state-supported or state-coordinated attacks against individuals can actually disrupt democratic processes. And we have this a lot in this, especially in this year, but in many years prior to the super election year with European elections as well, that there have been coordinated campaigns against especially female political candidates and journalists and activists, which makes them then kind of withdraw from the democratic processes, withdraw from being outspoken in public places, withdraw from running in elections. And then it has broader democratic and security consequences. And it was actually European Parliament in its report a couple of years ago actually acknowledged gender disinformation as a security problem for its election. So we already have this kind of like first signs that it's being treated as an issue very seriously, but there is still a lot that we don't know about the impacts, and we have to explore them further.
It's really interesting because we talked about state centrism earlier, where both of you actually said that the approach that we're having right now, they're very much state-centric, and that we need other approaches to finally combat the issues that we're all facing together. Yeah, basically a holistic approach. So my question to both of you, again, is in what ways do state-centric approaches, specifically maybe to the UN for you, Pavlina, and for you, the EU. Neglect the rights and the safety of marginalized groups. And after that question, I would really like to dive into more the aspects of intersectional feminism, collaboration, and what ethical challenges we'll have. So again, I'll ask the question again. In what ways do state-centric approaches to the UN or the EU, specifically when it comes to digital and cybersecurity, neglect the rights and safety of marginalized groups? I think, Jura, you can start, honestly, yeah.
I think you wanted to start with the UN, just to,
I'm happy to start.
No, I
We
can
can start with the UN and then go down,
No,
go down to the EU,
no,
if we can say that even.
completely. I mean, I can start, but then maybe it's better. I think it's better to start with the UN because I think you can get a broader framework.
Then let's do the UN and then go into
Sorry
the
for
EU.
putting you on the
This is
spot.
very long introduction to the UN dimension. Yes, so minorities. Minorities are very much still lacking considerations in these discussions. It doesn't come. It's also because of the granularity of these discussions, and this is why I started with the UN, because the granularity of the considerations and who we can focus on, where you can find consensus, will be way bigger at the EU level than is at the UN level. And just for like outlining where is the granularity in some matters at the UN is that, for example, the application of international law and international humanitarian law, it has been agreed that it applies in cyberspace, but it hasn't been agreed how it applies in cyberspace. So we are having still these kind of considerations, but of course you have, at the same time, there is a lot of, and I will not speak now about the role of civil society, academia, and other stakeholders, because we'll speak about it later on, but there are many of these organizations who bring these considerations to the mainstream. There are also many countries who do that. So like, I just wanted to highlight some perspectives that we already have many countries which have feminist foreign policy, and this should be applauded, and this should be recognized. We have Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Canada. What does it mean for state champions to be champion of feminist foreign policy? For example, for Canada, it's bringing gender perspectives. It's bringing also stakeholders. So to challenge, bring stakeholders in their like full capacity to participate in these processes. So feminism is challenging the roles of state actors and non-state actors in who has the say in these discussions. And also like bringing more evidence into these discussions. So a lot of funding for gender consideration and approaches, and collecting like data on different impacts to the minorities. What I wanted to highlight is the situation of victims, because how maybe not even as minorities are being discussed, though it was consideration in certain provisions under the emerging cybercrime treaty, and I will just like make little introduction for the Cybercrime Convention. UN is currently wrapping up the process, so it will conclude in early August this year on a Cybercrime Convention. Why is it a big deal for cyberspace? Because if this passes, we have legally binding international framework for cyberspace. For now, what have been decided at the UN, apart from the application of the body of international law and international humanitarian law and international human rights law, first, when it comes to the problem is not even the overall discussion, because we have gender perspectives and actually the recognition of gender across countries and across regions. But yet we have certain countries which are against these perspectives and against this kind of, further inclusion and transparency and etc. And why is it important? Because if you need broader agreement, you're never getting broader agreement on this. So we'll have a lot of discussion on, for example, victims and gender, but you will lack it like codified on paper and getting applied in practice. And I just wanted to point to two important considerations, one for cybercrime and one for cybersecurity on victims. So victims, it has been discussed, and gender has been discussed as part of the cybercrime process. But what we see, for example, when it comes to victims as such, is that this cybercrime convention could be an opportunity to increase the protection for victims and witnesses of cybercrime globally. So these not really marginalized groups, but vulnerable groups. And yet what we are seeing is that the convention for now is short of delivering for them, because it differs, instead of binding these provisions to international law and international human rights protection, etc., it just differs to domestic law. So whatever you already have for victims, you will have for the victims. So it's really not improving the situation of the victims. And then I would really like to highlight the victim-centered perspective that is Belgium right now kind of arguing for at international security fora at the UN. And it's saying that because of the impact which we are seeing, we need increased accountability in cyberspace based on victim-centered perspectives. And this is really wholesomely getting the victim perspective and the marginalized, because who are the victims and who are the most suffering, this will be, eventually like the minority, the marginalized, the over-targeted, the different groups. So we already have this kind of perspective present, but we still need more work and more cooperation to actually have it effective in practical means and deliver for the victims in practice.
Thank you. Juraj, before I give you the word, I would like to challenge one point a little bit to spice the discussion a little bit up. You mentioned feminist foreign policy and how it's very plausible that a lot of countries are pushing for it, specifically in the Europe. We see Norway and Germany who really changed the perspective within foreign policy into a feminist one. But we also see how, for example, Germany is currently dealing with wars and conflicts. So some might even criticize the approach of Germany and call it's not very feminist, the way you're dealing with conflicts, be it in the Middle East or be it with Ukraine and Russia. So the first question that popped up in my head when you were talking about it was, maybe feminist cybersecurity approaches could be actually seen as a branding tool to include more people, in the space. This is kind of like what the feminist foreign policy approach did. In fact, it actually implemented it as well. But the question that I have is it just a branding tool, or is it really changing something in the cyberspace? Because in feminist foreign policy, for example, we use it as a way to brand states and to brand their specific policy outlooks, but we don't necessarily see it implemented. And while a lot of critics are pushing on that and are saying, hey, actually a feminist foreign policy approach would look like this and this and this, the question that we specifically at the Hub always face when we talk about feminist approaches in cybersecurity is it really a way to find more inclusion for people? Not only inclusion means of physical inclusion, being part of the space, but also inclusion of minorities, who are threatened, their problems, their issues, things that concern them. Can we really use this approach to include them 100%, or is it just another way to brand another space to make it, look more fancy, if you can say it like that?
It will be always discussion between how much actually political declaration in this sense means if it's not followed by implementation. And I do think it has its merits to recognize it. I think it is brave, especially considering with how many countries you deal globally. It is still a brave act to even if you just brand yourself, it's a step forward. But of course, if you don't implement, it misses the opportunity. I cannot speak for all countries. I can speak for countries which some of them I already mentioned, such as Belgium and Canada and Germany in cyber matters, with which I really saw the very practical inclusion they do for stakeholders. The kind of they're listening to views from civil society organizations and academia, funding these opportunities for research, bringing these kind of considerations to the front row of the discussions. So I did see in the practice, of course, if you have, like, foreign policy means so many things.
Yeah, true.
It would be probably not such a positive picture looking on the whole scope of foreign policy, especially because because of the militarization of space we're experiencing, which brings certain considerations to more like they are more urgent than others, unfortunately. But from I still find it a very important step forward. It needs to be followed by implementation, and I have experienced many countries actually in this international cybersecurity and combating cybercrime space, transnational cybercrime, actually putting the work where their words are.
Thank you. Maybe because Pavlina already mentioned a couple of different countries and how they approach it. Maybe the same question to you that I asked earlier, but maybe from a different kind of perspective, and the perspective of what kind of different approaches are there around the world when it comes to digital and cybersecurity, and maybe even the focus on, do we see specific trends within the global north versus the global south, the global west versus the east? Where do you see the different approach specifically from an EU perspective?
Sure. So, but before I take on that, I would like to say a few words also about feminist foreign policy and its role in regulation of cyberspace. So, Madeleine Albright always used to say that, in a nutshell, foreign policy is how you get other country to do what you want. And even a country like Canada, which has a strong feminist foreign policy, on multiple occasions, they came up with proposals to open a working group at the UN that had very inclusive language on and wanted to include some of the elements of feminist approaches to cyberspace to the processes currently are going at the international level on responsible behavior of states in cyberspace. But of course, you see how the world looks like, and it's not. And I wouldn't say feminist foreign policy is winning. You see, even in countries like Sweden, which also used to be a beacon of feminist foreign policy after the new center-right government, and not the far-right, they are center-right, I would say, that the current government in a constellation just dropped feminist foreign policy. You look at China, you have Xi Jinping who said that women should come back to the kitchens and to their households and have more babies. I don't even have to talk about Vladimir Putin and Russia and how they treat women. So you look at the world. This is not a conducive environment for feminist foreign policy. So of course it's a tough challenge. And also, and to your question about what different approaches there are. So I would say there are two approaches in the way how states look at how to regulate cyberspace. And I think the Western approach, especially from the feminist perspective, has been a bit hypocritical in a way, because we always say, no, China and Russia, they want total control over their society. They want to, the primary objective of law and also of cyber regulations is thus to protect states and state authorities. And we always would say, no, we want to protect human rights, and it's to be centered on individual. So we have these two approaches currently. But on the other hand, what we do is just we instead of saying we protect state, we protect critical infrastructure. And then the European Union, and if you want to bring it now, so EU's cybersecurity strategy was adopted 2 years ago, and it's pretty simple. So it says what I just said. So, but I'm not, so we face a difficult world with a lot of nasty players, and they have cyber offensive capabilities. They want to do us harm, and we have to do something about it. And they label critical infrastructure and connected devices. So Internet of Things, smartphones, tablets, what have you. And really, there's nothing on the rights there, and it's only about the latest expansion of EU regulation is about resilience of hospitals, of water distribution systems, of waste collection systems, different protocols on what you should do when you're attacked. You should inform different incidents reporting, greater communication. That's Cyber Solidarity Act, but not really much on what to do when, for instance, you have a woman and you have a clinic that provides sexual and reproductive health care. Let's say, for instance, in Poland, where abortions are still outlawed, and you would just disclose this data. It's a cybersecurity issue because it's a breach of confidentiality of data. But we don't really deal with the victim. We don't deal with the follow-up. We only deal with so a hospital would need to report it to some authority, and even in that regard, if your house is on fire, you call fire brigade. Who would you call if you have a cyber? Even if you're a hospital, who would you call when your facility has been attacked by a cyber attack? So we're really far from this, even though we say that we put individual in the center, and it's not there. And there are many ways how you can address that by feminist approaches. So just to give you an example, so. There was an organization that did research with victims of image-based sexual abuse, and basically they came up to realization that by talking to the victims, what we can ask them questions like, what would you have done differently? What do you think might work? They said, oh, maybe if we have these tools designed. Maybe the design would be safe already, so they will be safe by design. So you will have also women, queer individuals, trans people involved in their design. They would think of different vulnerabilities, and they would reflect that in these settings. So. Many ways. I think it's a lot about inclusivity and putting to people not only when to the phase when an attack actually happens, but to prevent it and to assess all vulnerabilities. I think it's being proactive in this, so involving everyone with the very design of these products, rather than just having a few laws mandating states to report a cyber incident. I think this is the way to go, and Europe doesn't have that right now.
Pavlina already nodded. I already know you have something to say.
I do have some point to the previous question still, but I was just observing how we live to security by design. It was a whole road in front of me. What I just wanted to add on security by design, like this is, but of course, like if you are paying attention to like these impacts, you have to do the whole circle, like how is being designed, tested, deployed, assessed. And then if a crime happens, like how do you support the victims? Who do you call? And how you are supported, right? And what surprised me from doing interviews with national authorities on the cybercrime units and and what kind of more capacity they would need, oftentimes I was hearing something I did not expect, and it's psychological help. Psychological help for the victims. Because a lot of these attacks have severe consequences. You face this guilt and shame, and you are, depending on the community you are in, you are very much afraid of the consequences, and you can be re-victimized, which is also a point of my research, how once you are, like, they get the vector to attack you, for example, by data exploiting cyber attack, how they can victimize you in multiple occasions, and especially healthcare data are very sensitive to this. And I will, for many cases, I just wanted at this opportunity to mention one, which I read a lot of things, but this shocked me. It was about healthcare data and intimate images of being hacked. And then the attackers who hacked it then were seeking ransom from a cancer patient over her intimate pictures from the doctor. So like this is how far this kind of psychological harm can go. It can really devastate people who are already in vulnerable situations. But before we go to other topics, I wanted to, because one aspect which we have, like I have not mentioned when we discussed the policy and implementation, talking out of experience, having feminist foreign policy or feminist policy in general is an enabler, so it gives you a platform. What I've seen that really makes difference between having something on paper and having something in action are those who are championing the cause. You can have the same countries with the same policy, but you have different people in the positions, and it will have very different result. So what we need is, one thing is like the enabler, having platform, having this like policy in place, but also enable people and actually handpick people who can deliver on those results, because it really makes difference how things are being run when capable individuals who want to champion certain cause are in the positions. So let's not speak about policy, which is something detached, and when it's on paper, it's just like it materializes. It's very much human business still.
Yeah, we talked a lot about state-centeredness and how minorities are impacted by cybercrimes, specifically also in cyber wars and cyberspace. But what we didn't talk about, and that's why I'm trying to wrap it up a little bit, because I obviously want your questions as well, and I see online there were a lot of questions posed as well, so we're going to get into that as well. But we didn't talk about ethical considerations and challenges. And one question that I would really like to focus on in the next maybe 5 minutes is, how would a feminist perspective look at ethical use of emerging technologies, specifically in cyber warfare and in the cyberspace? So the example that I was going to bring in was, for example, the use, and this is general use of drones equipped with AI, or AI used in the cyberspace to, for example, predict how many civilian casualties there would be if you, for example, bombed a specific area. We saw this specifically be used a lot in the current warfares that we're seeing, specifically in the Middle East, with lavender as an example. The question that was posed a lot, actually, in the past couple of months was, is there a feminist perspective or a feminist solution to how emerging technology can be used ethically, specifically in the cyber war space? I will leave that open to you. You can also take your time to really think about it, because I honestly don't have an answer to it.
I would just add that emerging technologies can be very helpful also on defense side of things. So in these considerations, they can really enable better defense. They're already enabling better defense, and they're actually better advantage to defenders than they are attackers at this point. So it doesn't have just like the military perspective. It does have also the defense perspective with emerging technologies.
Yes,
it's a tough one, but I think what emerging and disruptive technologies bring is even greater blurring of lines between kinetic and cyber. Sure. So whether it's AI, whether you do not really know whether you're interacting with a computer or with a human being or with an algorithm, or, and that's a subject I think we should also talk about, the metaverse, because until now, I mean, of course, cyber incidents are very serious, but still there is opportunity, at least at some, I'm not saying in all cases, but to unplug. But with metaverse, with augmented reality and virtual reality, you cannot just unplug. You know, the cyber, you constantly, your physical world is layered with a lot of digital data and information. And this is where it gets even more dangerous, because this is really about human beings and about our own agency to decide, to do things without any undue interference. And what feminist approaches can bring here is, again, this focus on the individual. Because already, and you had instances of women having been gang raped in metaverse. So this is something that should really be a wake-up call for us, and to start thinking more about cybersecurity, not as a security of computers and systems, but about human beings. Because with AI, with drones as well, with metaverse, it will get us only closer and closer to us. And if we don't realize that we don't onboard feminist approaches, or, okay, I understand with the current political situation that world feminism might be too political or too sensitive for some, so you can call it whole of society approach or human security approaches. So put individual to the center of security with all the emerging technologies, and again, it would all, as Pavlina, it would get us back to safety by design, which is, I think, a very important concept.
I think that actually answered one of the questions that we had online, which was who should be held accountable when cybersecurity issues escalate during warfare, and how do feminist perspectives inform this responsibility? I think you kind of answered that question already, but because you talked about safety by design and security by design, maybe just to keep it clear for everyone, could one of you quickly explain what exactly that concept means or entails?
Yeah, so since I brought it up, I'm not an expert on safety by design, but but maybe Pavlina knows more about that. But it's very easy. So safety by design means before you implement a technology, you have an inclusive process with people of different of gender expressions, of different skin colors, really diverse group of individuals. And then you try to do different threat modeling. For instance, you have a new product, a new smartwatch, and then you have a focus group with people that do threat modeling, and you think about what can happen. Like it's like the example I got you with the park. If a man enters to a park, you see things differently. So if you have smartwatch, maybe, or just to get more something more specific, an app, a dating app, for instance, right? So if a man probably would be more comfortable with using that than women. So if you already at the stage of producing something before marketing it, if you already have people involved in all of diverse group of people that can have a discussion and can debate what different vulnerabilities there are from their perspective, it's safety by you design the product with the safety in mind, but not with safety in this very state-centric or technical sense, but with human safety in mind already. This is safety. That's safety by design. Sorry.
I would just add a very minor point on also being very conscious about what data we are collecting, because, and that's why the representative process in the design, right? Because many applications, when the market started to boom many years ago, and many companies, etc., like there is still, and now the new boom with generative AI, which is like very data hungry, to create the data, to exploit data, to use data, to just like being as a you're not perceived as a person, you're perceived as a user, you're perceived as many data points who can be monetized, and this can be very dangerous for marginalized groups and for underrepresented groups whose data can be then victimized differently. So also being very considered about designing applications and collection of data on, do we really need this type of data? Is it really essential for the product to have this data, or we are only collecting it and then for the sake of selling it to the third parties on making profit out of it, but someone in the process can be hurt.
Gotcha. Yura, I think you wanted to add something on this one.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point on data.
Yeah.
But I think data is a two-edged sword. So on the one hand, you should have greater autonomy on the use of your own data, and on consent of using different images so that you have the control. It's important for privacy, for security, but also what's important about data, that it's always good to do evidence-based policy, right? And on many cyber incidents, there are already data that are gender aggregated. So if you collect data in gender aggregated way, it gives you better picture of if there has been a hospital attacked or whatever facility, what impact were specifically on different groups. So the data helps us. If the more data we have, the more we know about the victims that have been touched, the better. So data collection is absolutely essential. Control over our own data, but also data collection and, but of course, safe data collection to shape better process and to have safety by design and policy. And also, you can have safety by design not only in developing products, but also laws and policies, right?
Gotcha. I think I would really like to open up the floor for questions here as well. You can definitely raise your hand if you have a question. If not, there are so many online. I don't have an issue with choosing the ones online as well. But if you do, please raise your hand. We have a microphone right here. Perfect, down there.
Hi, thanks for this very intriguing discussion. I have to say I'm not an expert on the field, so I've learned a lot, and my question would rather be to specify. I think you talked about shortly the arms race or potential arms race and feminist perspective on that, or feminism connected to that in general, and I think I did not catch the connection or the impact, and would you be able to clarify that? Thank you.
I think there was a question for Pavlina specifically.
Yes, I think so as well. Thank you very much for the question. So what I meant by that is that the state perspective is very much like political realism in a sense. Like, so we have, we see other countries getting getting equipped with cyber offensive capabilities. We want this as well. Instead of mitigating what is happening, instead of having mutual agreements to actually limit access and even design of these offensive tools, everyone is getting more and more offensive tools. So it's more like it's militarization as you have with kinetic weapons, but it's or nuclear weapons, but it's militarization with cyber offensive weapons, which many countries have at their disposal, and many others are working on them with different levels of sophistication, what these weapons can do. And these weapons are also being trained. So we've seen certain countries, and I will not name and shame, but we see countries attacking other countries with this weapon, enjoying these like below threshold attacks, knowing that they will not have repercussions in kinetic warfare, but maybe, and that's why we have toolbox like EU toolbox with sanctions and other accountability mechanisms, and joint attributions and others kind of accountability frameworks to deal with that. But what I meant about feminist perspectives, it's instead of getting hungrily into the arms race, to actually think about mitigating and limiting access to these weapons and their impact and not normalizing their deployment.
Would you like to add on that?
I just want to add to that that even NATO, has recognized cyber as a domain of warfare, and cyber attack may trigger Article 5. So this is something we should keep in mind. But what feminist approach offers here is this attention to individual and to protect the individual, as on the defense, but also when we do deploy, because we do, we kind of rule out, just hypothetically, in case of an armed attack, that it will be difficult to, it will be I don't think we can really assume that if there was an Article 5 situation, we wouldn't retaliate with cyber weapons. Of course, we must make sure that we do it in compliance with humanitarian law, which feminist approaches put great attention to as well.
Are there any more questions on the floor right here? Perfect.
Hey, thank you for taking the time for being here, and thank you for providing all the information. I'm afraid I also have to ask a clarification question, because along the panel I got the impression that, well, at least I couldn't make up my mind about the exact difference between a human-centric security conception and a feminist security conception. And I'm wondering what place the confrontation of structural patriarchal power structures, well, that's a double down, but what place does this confrontation have in your conception of feminist perspectives?
I think I raised the human-centric, right? So for me, I mean, human-centric is at least how I see that. Of course, there are scholars and experts who would disagree with that. But the human-centric approach is already a step further from state-centric approach, because it looks on human security, on an individual. But then feminist approaches goes even a step further from human-centric and recognizes that every human has different vulnerabilities. If it's a woman, if a trans individual, or a whole panoply of different groups have different vulnerabilities. So I would say human-centric would be all sides fits all. Feminism goes beyond that and recognizes that everyone is different and this should be taken into consideration when different policies are adopted.
Pavlina, would you like to add on that? Perfect. I think there was one more hand raised right here in the front.
Yes, hi, my name is Vincent. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. What I'm wondering is, because you made already kind of like this connection also to feminist foreign policy, and what we can see is that, yeah, if you talk about, for example, an arms race or militarization of the cyberspace, that like competitors, strategic competitors, often interpret a normative approach, such as, for example, a feminist approach, as a weakness, because of course something like that costs resources and it costs time. If you think about, for example, development processes, safety by design. So how do you think can we implement feminist perspectives and approaches into a strategic thinking as well, so that they are not only kind of like this label, but that, yeah, we maybe can also sell them to policymakers in a way that they bring a strategic advantage and are not just something like nice to have in terms of human rights and a human-centric and a feminist approach, yeah.
We're going to start with Pavlina this time.
This feminist perspective is not a weak perspective. A feminist perspective, for example, in international cybersecurity means that you have, instead of arms race, you have very strong accountability mechanisms. What is accountability is that you have consequences for your action. By designing, and we spoke about about arms race, etc. And the connection I wanted to make, that actually many people who now work in international cybersecurity come from disarmament practices, because the kind of accountability mechanisms which you see on other security issues and disarmament in other areas, you have many overlaps with cybersecurity. So feminism is just looking at other mechanisms which can very strongly hold the actors to account and kind of limit the damage to populations which would otherwise happen if the space is too militarized.
If I also And add to that, I also agree, it doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger. And not only to protect the victims, but, and I don't want to use this buzzword, resilience, but resilience in a nutshell means our ability to prevent, counter, or mitigate the impacts of an attack as a society. And in a case of an armed attack, it's not that just our militaries would be responding, the whole society will be affected. And the more our policies are based on this holistic approach, so the more our authorities will know where the vulnerabilities are and what to do to protect, to counter the attacks against that target these vulnerabilities. And also, you have to keep in mind that women form around 50% of our populations, and also other individuals. I think what always prevails is the diversity and inclusion in society that makes us stronger, because it allows us to respond. And why now everyone at NATO is happy that Finland has joined? Because Finland is a country that has this comprehensive security implemented. In Finland, they have regular exercises many times per year with different scenarios. They have it on national but also local level. So, to give you a very specific example, you have a scenario, a sea level in the Baltic Sea rises. What should you do? And then you have a table with people from businesses, from civil society, from government, from churches, talking what our role will be there, how we can defend our country. So, and if you add on the top of that recognition that different groups have different vulnerabilities, and these vulnerabilities, of course, vulnerabilities for the whole country, that makes us even stronger, because our societies will be stronger, more resilient to any attack. So it's just, I think what simply speaking, what feminist approaches gives us is to be better prepared to weather the challenges. It makes us more safe and more apt to respond and to be resilient, to be able to include everyone in defense. And that's why everyone looks now to the Nordics, how they do it. Both Sweden, they call it total defense. In Finland, I think it's comprehensive defense framework. So I think this is what it is about.
I just wanted to add one point on societal resilience and why feminist approaches are very important there. And I hope that we will not be asked for another clarification, because I feel like we are very unclear in our responses. But go ahead if you need another one. So one, like the intersection I see, and it comes from my earlier research on hate speech against online hate speech against Roma in Europe, and how this hate speech can lead to actual physical attacks, and how this disrupts societal resilience as such. So when we look at these groups, it's not just, we have to understand, it's not just for the sake of the groups themselves. It's about the societal resilience we are building. If we are so vulnerable that we allow, we disregard certain harm and hatred which is forming against group in our society, we make our societies very vulnerable to, for example, foreign actors through their information campaigns, radicalizing populations in our societies, getting their politicians, elected, because we are, as a society, then very vulnerable to certain narratives. And if we alienate certain groups in the society because we do not pay attention to the hate being spread against them, then it's just like it's very easy just to have conflict with broad repercussions for the security in the country. So we make ourselves vulnerable if we don't pay attention to these intersectionalities in cyberspace. So these perspectives are not only for the victims, they are for all of us, for the victims primary, but for all of us as a society, that we can go forward supporting each other, because there has been so many studies on this, like how inclusivity, how transparency, how participation of women and minorities, even in peace-building processes and whichever other processes, bring better solutions, long-lasting solutions, and solutions which actually get implemented because they're well-informed. So it's about us all to have these considerations built in our policies and practice.
Yuda, I think you wanted to edit on that point.
Yeah, well, I think what is also important to have in mind is the rise of misogyny and hate of women, and this is also orchestrated by different groups. And if we talk about intersectionality, it's also on the attacking side. A lot of pro-Russian groups, a lot of pro-Russian trolls also spread hate against women and misogynistic messaging. So by targeting and by feminist approaches and keeping this in mind and in consideration when we do our policies, we also we makes ourselves stronger, because ultimately we will reach the same culprits. You know, if you look now who spreads disinformation about Ukraine, it's the same people that spread disinformation against COVID-19 vaccines, and they also spread different kinds of hate speech against human rights defenders, journalists, media, and women, and they don't shy from really heavy gender-based violence, and some of them. So it's intersectional, really, also on the attacking side, not only on the defense side.
But speaking of intersectionality, there's one question here that I actually really liked. It goes less into the political sphere and more into the economic sphere. So the question was, how do asset management firms like BlackRock shape the cybersecurity industry without truly implementing ethical values? And what impact can feminist approaches have? I'm not sure whether you guys are into BlackRock or not.
Maybe what can be said is that we didn't mention that, we didn't emphasize this fact enough, that a lot of critical infrastructure, a lot of services we use is in private hands. So whatever we talk, whatever policy state adopts, it's also important to have private sector on board and regulate them, so that it also reflects the feminist approaches. What was the question specifically?
So how do asset management firms like BlackRock shape the cybersecurity industry without truly implementing ethical values? And the second question to that was, what impact can feminist approaches have?
Yeah, that's really business and human rights issue from a theoretical perspective. No, definitely, it's about the private industry and the fact that we are. Sometimes we think we are customers of these big platforms, but in a way we are sometimes also what they sell to the customers that are also private companies. So I'm not really expert into asset management, but it's an important issue to keep in mind, that these are often private companies that have a great say on how cybersecurity is managed. Yes.
Maybe on that point, there are a lot of asset management firms that obviously do own cybersecurity-related infrastructure, but also there are a lot of big tech companies that are very highly involved in that field. And I think a feminist approach, in this case, actually pushes for more responsible tech. So what we at the Responsible Hub, just to give a brief overview of what we work on, at the Responsible Technology Hub, we actually look into how responsible tech is made and what approaches are out there. And there's for example, with AI, there's a responsible AI approach that is heavily based on feminist approaches, such as human in the loop, safety by design, security by design. These are all approaches that are very much focused on that. So I think a feminist approach in this case would actually not only impact policy, but in fact policy would impact the big management firms and the big tech firms. But Pavlina, if you have nothing to add on that.
I do just, like, it's in general with, I don't know the name of the company, so I was rather clueless about that. But I wanted to add on the role of private sector. Like there is so much work to be done. It's a very fragile balance, depending on the actor. But definitely there is more work to be done on adhering to human rights principles, ethical principles, and you cover it very well. What I wanted to add is what we are also seeing is the other side of the coin, to have tech companies and data custodians and internet service providers and that are being included in how policies are being made. This doesn't mean that you have on one hand states and on the other you have heavy lobbying. It means actually being in certain kind of partnerships and non-state and state actors. And we have had it represented at the UN with different modalities of inclusion of actors. But I will just mention one example with the Cybercrime Convention, because it's quite unprecedented how actually big tech started to cooperate with human rights organizations and with civil society actors and academia, coming to the final phases of negotiations and having joint statements with these organizations saying like, this is wrong with the document. So, well, on the other hand, on one hand, of course, like private sector needs to have clear lines on how to operate. On the other, there are also many practical considerations for them, how they function, and also many human rights considerations which they are arguing, for example, in legislation combating cybercrime. So it does not kind of punish their customers, or does not excessively reveal sensitive data of their customers, etc. So, like private sector and legislation is very complex topic, but it has both both the regulation side to it and both the participatory side to it, and we cannot just focus on one or the other.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. If there is none, oh, perfect. There's one right there, Gillian.
Thank you very much. I will also state I'm not an expert on the topic, so forgive me if I not going the right direction. But I was thinking I think you finished the talk with a piece of AI, and I was thinking, can there be a positive to continue on security by design, a positive usage of AI in this? I think a concrete examples like in the smear campaigns, the stalking. Can you apply this and then in an ethical way implement this that is also not it's misused in any way? Thank you.
Would one of you like to answer? Or would you like to repeat your question one more time?
It's good.
No, we heard that, yeah. But
Yeah,
I don't know
you're good?
Yeah. I can start. So how can basically AI as an emerging technology help the feminist cause or empower women? What was that the question?
Not only, what are positive examples where AI could help basically the feminist approach in cybersecurity?
Definitely, when it comes to, AI is already being used, for example, for sieving through the content. So it can help to, it's a powerful tool to help to recognize harmful content and protect the over-targeted groups or protect individuals online. And it has its limitations. We know that especially for content, AI can then over-reliance on AI can lead to censorship of certain voices, and there have been many examples on the content side, but it can be a very powerful tool. Or AI is for many years deployed in, for example, spam. So you get less attacked through spam. You actually get just like really little percentage of what you would otherwise get in your mailbox. So you know, and just like one feminist perspective on this, which we have not really put out there, is that it's about all the groups. So, for example, how disabled people could be targeted specifically by financial scams, or elderly people. So you have many considerations, feminist considerations to that, and it can be, and it has been very powerful tool to that. Of course, there is a lot of thread, and we can speak about AI bias for another.
We could speak a whole other panel discussion on that.
For another panel discussion, and this is the very sad part of the story, how still very much biased it is, and we need to improve it. But it can be, especially like one last point I would like to make is for education. It is a great empowering tool for education, and one thing which I particularly like with generative AI. Which I myself use on daily basis, is that, you know, remembering very personal story, like coming as a non-native speaker to English-speaking environments and applying for universities. There was no one to help me really, and I was not proficient in English, and I had to manage somehow, which meant like painful hours over Googling every term, cross-checking and checking with all these tools. And now we have so much tools which help you to navigate this space, this language space, even when you come from community which would otherwise like get more, you know, like you have more hurdles to get into this space. And these tools can help you with education and can also help you with polishing your language, getting your message out there. And kind of like leveling the field for people across the board, which is very, very empowering for people who are otherwise marginalized.
I think it was
perfect.
Perfect answer. Yeah.
Amazing, because I was already writing down. There are a couple of, just to give another example, pattern recognition. So AI is often used to recognize patterns, be it behavioral patterns, be it data patterns, and so on. So you brought up the example of stalking. So AI could be used, for example, to recognize patterns of a specific stalker and to basically alert the victim beforehand, or to even alert the stalker beforehand, because stalking is a mental health issue. And we know this at this point, for those who watched a specific Netflix show in the past couple of weeks. But with that, it recognizes patterns that could actually help us understand each other better and ourselves better. So even when it comes to security from oneself, AI is actually a really good tool to use that. But I'm actually looking at the time, and we have 2 more minutes. I want to give you the floor to just give the audience a statement that they can go home with. I think we talked a lot about holistic approaches today. We talked a lot about human-centeredness, a lot about security of minorities and how tech impacts the security of minorities. What is one thing you would like the audience to go home with tonight and to think about it for the rest of the weekend?
That's really a challenge to respond to this question.
If I may.
Sure.
I just wanted, I'm a policy person, so for me, evidence-based policies is everything. To make a change and to actually argue for the change, you need the data, you need the evidence. What we now see on all we have discussed right now is that the space is still under-researched and under-resourced. What we are relying on, and also why I'm doing, research as part of my fellowship into these issues, is that there is patchwork of of this evidence. There is a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit done with civil society organizations, something with human rights organizations, something by academia, something supported by private companies, something sponsored by states themselves. But you don't have something more systematic. You have speeches and you have interventions, but you don't have it codified in documents. You don't have something that could be a more systematic proof of the harm with all these intersecting vulnerabilities to it, something that would really make stronger cause for broader change in this space. So I would really, if I could have one wish, is not to just have recognition and awareness about these topics, which is very important, but like very systematic support of these issues from actors who do have the resources. And we see a lot of these partnerships, and it's something which is very close to my heart, whether on cybersecurity side or then preventing cybercrime and investigating cybercrime, is the partnership, like more holistic, and we speak about holistic a lot, but what I mean by holistic partnership is that you have state authorities working with you. You have private sector of different, not just the usual suspects in the room, not just big tech, but local tech. Those who are regionally present, those who are challenged very differently in this space, and who also lack capacity to do better. And civil society organizations who do have the local contacts and networks and trust from the communities, and them working together. And this is something we see happening, but it is something that needs to be happening way more.
Thank you, Pavlina. Juraj?
So people that work on security are usually pessimists. So that's why security conferences are always grim places to be. But of course, it's not this one, yeah. But I really like that the last question was on a positive note. What can we do? What technology can do to empower women and help feminist approaches? So I think our starting point should be that we should not fear technology. It's a great empowering tool. Technology has always pushed us forward. It's the only vehicle we have to progress in our societies. The important thing is to keep in mind that there are vulnerabilities and there are actors that want to do us harm, both individually, but of course to different states. And that's why we should always keep this in mind, that it's essential to be inclusive when we think about security. Not only about cybersecurity, it's also in all other spheres of security. We have to take into account people that have different vulnerabilities, because if societies are as strong as their weakest link, and if we don't have this on our radar constantly, we will be much weaker. And our opponents, I would say Russia, China, and other authoritarian states that exploit vulnerabilities we have, and if we really claim that we are different, then we are centered on the individual and on human rights. And when women empowerment is important for us, we should strive for that, and we should take action, and we should demand this also from our policymakers, but also do that ourselves. So everyone should get involved in whatever field you work on security. Keep this in mind. Cybersecurity is a team sport. It's not just for one individual or for one group to have the most important interest. This is what I would say at the end.
With that being said, my hope for today is that you're going out of this room and you learned something as much as I did today at this stage. I hope you open up this debate in whatever security forums you are, be it at home, be it with your friends, be it in forums and conferences that you're attending. Talk about this issue, bring up feminist perspectives, even if it's a way to criticize the current status quo, to criticize current feminist approaches. It's really important to have this debate, and I think this debate needs to be pushed by the new young generation, and I'm really thankful that so many young faces are here as well today. So I thank you for your attendance, and I thank the panelists, Pavlina and Juraj, for attending and speaking to me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hmm.